Shavua Tov, Parashat Vaera. Are we all Pharaoh at times? Well, it doesn't mean that we go out and get slaves and beat them and murder them, but the psychology of Pharaoh may be something that affects us at different times in our lives, and we might be well advised to learn what that psychology is in order to improve our lives. What am I talking about? Well, let's take a look at the psychology of Pharaoh, which is a fascinating topic. But in order to understand the psychology of Pharaoh, we have to first ask the theological question. It says in the Torah that plague after plague, Pharaoh refused to allow the Israelites to go because God had hardened his heart. But how could God harden his heart if one of the principles of faith is that we have free choice? We can choose to do good, we can choose to do evil. God hardening Pharaoh's heart seems to negate that principle of free choice, and it also seems to be unfair. There are a number of approaches. The first approach says that yes, indeed, just as God suspended the laws of nature to bring about the 10 plagues that were brought about because of Pharaoh's continuous refusing, so too God suspended the law of nature of free choice in order to enable that process to move forward. In other words, it was a temporary suspension of free will, of Pharaoh's free will to be specific, for a higher purpose. What was the higher purpose? To create such a strong faith in the hearts of the Israelites that they would never lose that faith. To make sure that the faith would endure throughout history, we had to witness overt miracles, suspensions of the laws of nature, to see that God controls all of nature and demonstrates his control in such a powerful and impressive manner. That would then create the faith that would last throughout time, as is witnessed by the fact that every year we sit down at the Passover Seder. There's another reason, too, why God suspended Pharaoh's faith, perhaps to actually benefit the Egyptians. How so, you may ask? Well, we'll ask a small question to get to the answer, and that is, when the Torah says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, the name used for God is Yud-Keh-Vav-Keh, the four-lettered name of God. That name connotes mercy. How is it merciful to harden Pharaoh's heart to bring more punishments? I would expect that the other name of God, Elohim, which means judge, which refers to justice, that would be the name, because God is hardening his heart in order to punish him and the Egyptians. That's not mercy, but actually it may be. The Abarbanel says that the Egyptians had done such terrible crimes to the Israelites that they deserved complete destruction. In order to give them atonement so that they shouldn't be destroyed, these 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea took place. That was what we call in Hebrew a kapara. It was an atonement for their sins and enabled them to allow the Israelites to go at the end, which then brought to them a certain measure of forgiveness so that Egypt was not completely destroyed. So there is mercy to Egypt in the fact that there would be these 10 plagues. That is the first approach, that the law of free choice was suspended in the case of Pharaoh. There is, however, another approach, and that is that indeed Pharaoh's free choice was not suspended, it was actually restored. How so? Because, well, free choice, says the Seforno, requires a equality of options. I have to be able to 50% choose this or 50% choose that, good or evil, in order for there to be free choice. Well, Pharaoh, if you think about it, didn't really have a choice, because what was happening to Egypt with these plagues, with these unbelievable miracles, may have denied him free choice, and he would have chosen to allow the Israelites to go, not because that was what his heart and his soul told him, but simply because of fear of the consequences of what was happening. So God strengthened his heart so that he did not allow that fear to be a factor, and then he could make his choice based on the topic itself. Is it ethically and morally correct for me to continue to enslave these people, or should I let them go? What is the right path? And each time he chose badly. And that was his actual free choice. So God simply strengthened his heart to restore free choice, not to take it away. And this is actually an interesting psychological thing, because, well, if Pharaoh is going to allow the Israelites to go, God is going to wait until he is making that decision on true free choice, that this is what he, Pharaoh, wants to do, not considering any external factors. That is a much more powerful decision. The land of Israel is holy. This is not a commercial. I'm going to expand upon the topic. The land of Israel is holy nowadays. Even though the temple was destroyed, the holiness brought about when Ezra brought the Jews back from Babylonia and they settled in the land remains until this day. However, the holiness that was in the land at the time of the first settlement, the time of Joshua, Yehoshua ben Nun, that holiness has long since passed. When the Israelites were exiled at the time of the Babylonians, the holiness of the land disappeared. But when the Romans kicked us out, the holiness did not disappear. What is the difference between the two? Why did the first holiness in the time of Joshua not last beyond the existence of the kingdom? And why did the holiness brought about in the time of Ezra last forever until today and into the future? What's the difference? The difference is, says the Rambam, that the holiness brought about by Yehoshua, by Joshua, was a holiness brought about by conquest, by external force. The Israelites conquered the land and they then infused it with holiness. So as long as the conquest remains, as long as the Israelites are the masters of the land, the holiness is there. But when the Israelites are exiled and gone, then the holiness disappears. Because external force can only bring about a change that lasts as long as the external forcer is. However, when the holiness comes from a change from within, Ezra did not conquer the land. He brought Jews back from Babylonia. They settled, they built, they cultivated, they created a Jewish country from within, an internal change called chazakah, called establishing, if you will. That kind of a holiness is much more powerful. That lasts forever. And so it could be the same thing here, that God didn't want Pharaoh to decide to liberate the Israelites because of conquest, because of force of the plagues, but rather he wanted him to make a decision from his own internal moral and ethical growth. And that only would take place at the very last plague, as we hopefully will discuss at the end of this video why. So that is one approach. I would like to add to that it could be that God was strengthening his heart because it's not that Pharaoh was wavering, but the people around him were, and they were trying to force his hand to let the Israelites go. They wanted to do an intervention. And I base myself on the fact that at least 3 or 4 times, when it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart, it adds a little phrase, Velo shama alehem. He didn't listen to them. He didn't listen to his chartumim, his wise men, his magicians, the people around him who wanted him to let the Israelites go already. So God hardened his heart that he shouldn't hear what they were saying and he should continue to do what he wanted to do, which is to maintain the Israelites as slaves. The late great scholar and scientist, Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twersky, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, was a well-known descendant of Hasidic Rebbes, and he himself was a great Torah scholar. But he was also regarded as the leading expert on addictions. He was a psychologist who founded a clinic in Pittsburgh, a famous clinic helping people recover from alcoholism and drug addictions and other types of addictions. He was very famous across America. He wrote books that are widely read. He even collaborated with Charles Schulz, the author of the comic strip Peanuts and Charlie Brown, to write cartoons which deal with mental health and self-esteem and other important topics. Rabbi Twersky takes a look at the story of Pharaoh and he says, this guy has all of the symptoms of a classic alcoholic. The alcoholic knows they have a problem. The alcoholic knows what's going on and yet refuses or is unable to change his behavior despite the obvious consequences. That's how Pharaoh is. He knows what's going on. He sees what's happening and yet he can't seem to break free from his refusal to let the Israelites go. And Dr. Twersky says there are 3 parts or 3 phases that the addict, the alcoholic, for example, goes through. The first one, and pardon the pun apropos of the Parsha, is called denial. How so? The person, the alcoholic, at first will say, I don't really have a problem. I can stop drinking whenever I want. It's not an addiction. I'm okay. They deny that they have a problem. But when things get worse, as they unfortunately inevitably do, then he says, okay, I have a problem, but it's not so bad. This is the second phase, which is called rationalization. It's not so bad. I can deal with it. I need to keep a little bit of drinking because if I don't, I'm going to go to pieces emotionally, etc., and so forth. That's the phase of rationalization. When it becomes worse yet, and the person realizes that their rationalizations are not rational, and it's just not true, they still continue to drink because they have now reached the phase called compulsion, which means they are simply unable to stop. It is almost a physiological drive that they cannot control. And these 3 phases are evident in Pharaoh's behavior. I was thinking that perhaps one could apply them to one of the cryptic passages of the Haggadah, and that is the initials, the simanim, that Rabbi Yehuda gave to the 10 plagues. He summarized them in 3 short phrases, Detzach, Adash, Be'achav. 3 plagues of Dam, Tzvardea, and Kinim, which is blood, frogs, lice. Then the second group is Adash, arov, wild animals, dever, cattle disease, shchin, boils. And then the third group has the four final plagues: barad, which is hail, arbe, locusts, choshech, darkness, and makat bechorot, the plague of the smiting of the firstborn. What is Rabbi Yehuda doing to put these things into an acrostic? The 10 plagues are not too difficult to remember. Why does he need to go Ditzach Hadash Be'achav? Many commentaries. One of them that I remember points out that each of these groups has a closing circle structure. The first of the plagues is far out, is far away from the individual. That would be blood, that would be wild animals, and that would be hail. That you could close your doors, go into your house, shut your windows, and not know that the plague is happening. This, I think, is denial. Pardon the pun. That Pharaoh is not aware, or he may be intellectually aware, but he can block it out of his consciousness and deny that it is happening because the blood is in the river, and the wild animals are out in the streets, and the hail is out in the streets, and he's locked up safely, comfortably inside his palace in an inner room, if you will. However, there comes a time when you cannot be in denial anymore, when things are touching you personally. And the second of each group is a plague that touches Pharaoh personally. The plague of frogs, the Torah says that it came into the houses, into the beds, into the ovens, into the microwave, into the toaster oven, into the household appliances. It was there. Pharaoh could not escape contact with those frogs. So denial was no longer possible. And therefore, he had to go to rationalization, saying it's nasty, but it's not something I can't survive with. That I can't survive, and therefore I don't really need to change because the benefits outweigh the discomforts. That would be frogs. In the second one, it was cattle disease. His cattle is dying, so he's suffering a financial loss. And the same thing with locusts in the third group, where he's again seeing the crops that they depend upon for food being destroyed by the locusts. Therefore, it's affecting him. He cannot deny it, but he can justify it, say it's not that bad. But then there comes a point when even the rationalization doesn't work, when the person is suffering themselves. And the third of each group is something that affected each person, each individual. Lice is in the hair, and shechin, boils, is on the skin, and darkness was so powerful that even in the houses, the darkness was palpable. People couldn't even move inside their houses. They were blind for a period of 3 days or longer, depending on the midrashim. And so therefore, that's the point when, even though you know that it's happening, and even though you know that you are suffering terribly, you're unable to break free the phase of compulsion, the third phase of the addict, of the addiction. And Pharaoh goes through these phases 3 times, until one plague breaks the pattern. And so too, by the way, says Rabbi Twersky, it's not just addicts and alcoholics, it's anybody who has a destructive behavior, a eating problem, a moral problem, whatever it might be, any behavior that is something that we should know is not serving us, something that we should know we shouldn't even try to justify, and something that we should certainly not allow ourselves to be compelled to do. So we should find the way to change that behavior. How does Pharaoh change his behavior, even though it's only temporarily? But he does. He lets the Israelites go by the plague of the firstborn. I think it's because the plague of the firstborn is the first time that Pharaoh has to think about somebody else, about the consequences of his actions, not to an anonymous people out there that you happen to be the king of, but rather his own firstborn, his own children, his own legacy, his own future. Once a person begins to think, I am responsible for people who depend upon me. I cannot go to pieces like this. I cannot be an alcoholic because my alcoholism is destroying my family, a person might say, who is an alcoholic. And when they think about what it's doing to their children, to their loved ones, to their spouse, whatever, when they think about the impact upon the people whom they care about most, then they can sometimes find the strength to break through the compulsion, to stop with the rationalizations, and to stop with the denial, and indeed to make a change. And so therefore, while we may at times, each in our own way, each in its own intensity, find ourselves with the Pharaoh mentality, being aware and knowing that we are important to everybody that is in contact with us, to our loved ones, to our families, to our neighbors, to our friends, that we have to rise to the occasion, and that is the key to indeed living an elevated life, and that is the key to bringing about liberation, freedom from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination, and going from blessing to blessing. Shavua Tov.